ahead of today's meeting, it was reported that the U.S. and Israel are inching towards an agreement on Trump's plan to end the war in Gaza, which Trump hopes will be announced after his meeting with Netanyahu. What are your expectations, this 21-point peace plan?
Yes, first of all, good morning, and thank you very much for having me, and greetings to your guest. There are now at the last hour of negotiations between the U.S. and the Israeli delegation, of course, mainly speaking about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. There have been reportedly some sticking points before finalizing the agreement, and from multiple U.S. resources, these sticking points are mainly in two issues. The first is the 21-point plan by President Trump includes the involvement of the Palestinian Authority, which, as we know, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't want to get involved because he doesn't see it as a partner in the first place. And there is, of course, in one of these 21 points, also a path towards a recognition of a two-state solution, which eventually, as we see in this plan, is paving the way for a Palestinian state, which also Benjamin Netanyahu finds hard to accept. That is the first major sticking point in these negotiations. The other one, which other U.S. resources also have referred to, has to do with the fact that there has been some negotiations about sequencing and timing. So the plan mentions something about Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, and the fact that the Israelis are not going to occupy or annex any parts of Gaza or the West Bank in return, of course, of the disarmament of Hamas. But that plan doesn't mention how the sequence will be, and there is no mention of any time frame. So the idea is, what is going to happen first? Is it Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, or the Hamas disarmament? The Israelis are conditioning that any talk about withdrawal from Gaza has to happen after and only after Hamas disarms. So there are talks now about like what is going to happen first, the time frame of withdrawal, the time frame of disarmament, plus, as I mentioned, the sequencing of those points. As I mentioned previously, the fact that Netanyahu doesn't want any involvement of the Palestinian Authority, which is something the Arab and the Muslim countries, which have held negotiations with President Trump last week, strongly rejects.
Well, before getting into the nitty-gritty of the peace plan proposed by Trump, Mr. Abu Isa, Axios now says that the U.S. and Israel are inching towards an agreement. Does that mean that Netanyahu is acquiescing to U.S. demands under pressure?
Greetings to you and Fadi and all the audience. Yes, this is the fourth visit by Prime Minister Netanyahu to the United States within 8 or 9 months. So he is in continuous communication with the American administration, and I believe that the American administration will not present any plans without running it by Israel, at least to have a general agreement on most of the points. There is some differences in some of the items, and that's why Netanyahu will be at the White House to iron out those differences between Israel and the U.S. And this plan is supposed to bypass the pressure, the diplomatic pressure that we saw in New York few days ago when Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke to an empty hall. Most of the countries withdrew their delegation from the hall of the United Nations to let Israel that they are not approving the behavior of Israel in the Gaza Strip. And that diplomatic pressure need to be formalized and harvested by the Palestinian Authority, who is supposed to be working together with all the forces within the Palestinian forces to bring to the table enough diplomatic pressure to counter the Israeli army's strength supported by the United States. So there is the two sides between the United States and Israel on one side, and then the rest of the world combined is pushing for a two solution, and Netanyahu is trying to bypass that by giving some agreement to some of the pieces to agree to withdraw within 3 to 5 years, and agree he wants the hostages, he wants all his objectives achieved as soon as possible, and then he will take his time to let the Palestinians live and prosper.
Mr. Helani, Trump hopes to lock in a framework to free the remaining detainees and end the war. And you've mentioned that there are some critical deal points or deal breakers, maybe, that Netanyahu must accept for that to happen and for Hamas to endorse it, be it the timing and the sequence and the order of a disarmament of Hamas or Israeli withdrawal. What would be the main deal breakers as well for Hamas, and what could be compromised over?
So the fact that the Israelis will eventually withdraw from Gaza, that was a condition that Hamas was saying that any negotiations without the Israelis withdrawing from Gaza will not be acceptable. So we have two things on the table. First, there is going to be release of all the hostages, the living ones and the remaining bodies of those who died. And the second one is that there will be in return release of Palestinian prisoners, whether those who have life sentences because of killing Israelis or those who have been captured after October 7. Numbers, according to reports, are talking about like 1,700 or around 2,000 Palestinian prisoners will be released, plus a promise from the Trump administration that the Israelis will not annex the West Bank, and they will not also try to occupy in the future the Gaza Strip or even try to annex part of it. So there are two strong things on the table for Hamas, and these were to the point, actually. These were not presented only to Hamas, but these were like breakers, if you will, as you mentioned in the question, to the Arab and the Muslim countries, negotiators who were with President Trump last week in New York trying to negotiate a deal. And let's remember that their firm stance came thanks to two things. Number one, the increasing isolation which Israel is having on the international stage because of the atrocities in Gaza. And that has been translated, as we saw last week also, with the recognition of a Palestinian state by many Western countries. That is one thing. And another thing which also increased the isolation of the Israeli government is the strike on Doha, trying to kill, of course, the leaders of Hamas there, while going over the Steve Witkoff proposal, as we know, trying to find a solution, of course, to the stance, to some of the sticking points, which these leaders had with the proposal. So that these two things actually gave the Arab and Muslim leaders who met with President Trump last week a firm and unified stance. And many, by the way, American media are speaking about possibly something which is one time in a history, unified, unanimous stance from the Arab and Muslim countries that, number one, any involvement from the Arab countries must have a Palestinian state recognized and must have the involvement of the Palestinian Authority. So while we are speaking about disarming Hamas, but at the same time, we are not speaking about occupation of the Gaza. We are speaking about complete withdrawal of the Israelis. So these are two things which the Arab and the Muslim countries communicated to Hamas. And obviously, Hamas, in my opinion, is not in any place now to negotiate or, let's say, reject this proposal, because it ends the war, guarantees the withdrawal of Israelis, and it paves the way for a Palestinian state ruled by, of course, the Palestinian Authority.